the judges.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. And I am off mute, thankfully. I'm Candida Steele still, and retired as a judge from the U.S. Civilian Board of Contract Appeals. And Rebecca?
Good afternoon, and thank you for being back, and thank you to your teacher. I am Rebecca Tinder, retired attorney from Charleston, West Virginia, and the West Virginia We the People coordinator.
And Lindsay?
I have to tell you, you all have the most deadpan faces I have seen. Good Lord. I'm sorry, that wasn't what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm Lindsay Draper. I am currently Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Institute for Wellbeing in Law.
Great. And could you tell us who you all are, please?
I'm Peyton Dowdy.
I'm Jocelyn Vereen.
I'm Kaylee Rogers.
And my name is Sammy Lang.
Great. And we're here still on Unit 5, doing question 2 today. And I'll go ahead and read it for the recording. Political and social movements in American history have been successful because of the right of assembly. President Abraham Lincoln wrote in a letter that, quote, "The right of peaceable assembly is part of the constitutional substitute for revolution." Do you agree or disagree with President Lincoln? Why? What is the history of freedom of assembly in America? What historical or contemporary evidence is there, if any, that political and social movements have led to significant changes in law and policies? And what limits, if any, should be placed on the right to freedom of assembly? You may begin.
We agree with President Lincoln. However, Thomas Jefferson felt the tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. The First Amendment protects the rights for citizens to form and express their own opinions.
Freedom of assembly was rooted in colonial America. This was perpetuated by the Sons and Daughters of Liberty and Shays' Rebellion as the turning point for a constitutional republic. Once George Washington became president, the Whiskey Rebellion greatly changed the way people thought about assembly and rights. During the antebellum era, not every movement's change was for the positive. In South Carolina, an 1800 law forbade slaves from assembling. Following Nat Turner's rebellion, the legislature strengthened Virginia's Black Code. Because many abolitionists were women, freedom of assembly was inevitably linked with the women's rights movements and organized their efforts around a particular form of assembly, the convention famously known as Seneca Falls. As Akilamara has observed, the 19th century movements of the disenfranchised brought a different lived experience to the words of the First Amendment's Assembly Clause. In the 1876 decision, U.S. v. Cruikshank, the private citizens could not be prosecuted for denying the freedom of assembly to other citizens. During the Progressive Era, labor movements such as the Haymarket Riot, Pullman Strike, and the Homestead Strike all helped to bring about better working conditions. The National American Women's Suffrage Association helped pass the Anthony Amendment in 1920. In 1937, DeJohn v. Oregon recognized the right to peacefully assemble is a right to congregate to those of free speech and press and is equally fundamental.
Contemporarily, civil rights groups took action to address discrimination on the basis of race and sex. In Columbia, South Carolina, African American students marched the State House grounds, carrying signs with messages such as "Down with segregation." The Supreme Court decision, Edwards v. South Carolina, concluded, circumstances in this case reflect an exercise of these basic constitutional rights in their most pristine and classic form. In response to the 1963 March on Washington, Congress followed by passing the Voting Rights Acts of 1965 and the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. One of the NAACP's key victories was the U.S. Supreme Court's 1954 decision in Brown v. Board of Education. Furthermore, feminists during the early 1970s lobbied Congress to add sex as a protected class category. In the case of Moritz v. Commissioner, RBG argued that the law was gender-blind and all groups are entitled to equal rights. On June 23, 1972, Title IX was enacted to fill this gap and prohibit discrimination in all federally funded education programs. The ERA era finally came to an anticlimactic end in 2020, falling short of its drop date by over 30 years. Over the past 2 decades, major movements like the LGBTQ movement were instrumental in the Supreme Court case of Overvelge v. Hodges. The Black Lives Matter movement has also been significant for equality of the races.
We believe there should be limits placed on the right to freedom of assembly. For example, the 1939 court case, Hague v. Congress of Industrial Organizations, ruled that people have the right to assemble in a public forum, such as in streets, parks, and on sidewalks. the government is responsible for ensuring that demonstrations remain peaceful and do not endanger community safety or unreasonably inconvenience the public. Once the movement breaks the original intent or becomes in any way violent, it should be stopped immediately and not protected by First Amendment freedom, such as the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Also, when the gathering can be a health hazard to the people, such as gatherings during the pandemic like COVID-19, it should be limited. As a general rule, courts allow curfews. The curfews are just needed to keep order due to immediate threats to life or property. The First Amendment applies only to government actions, so private property owners are generally free to keep groups from protesting or gathering on their property. Also, some states, like California and New Jersey, provide broader rights in the federal constitution for assembly and speech on separate types of private property, such as shopping centers and private universities.
Okay, that was quite something. Could you tell me a little bit more about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's case that you cited in your opening statement?
Could you give a specific case name?
You said that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with women's rights and Title IX, you cited a case and I didn't get it written down, but I wanted to know more about what you thought about it.
You called her RBG.
You called her RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right.
I feel that in the court case of Moritz v. Commissioner by RBG, it was very biased towards sexes, and it was to help fight the freedoms to get more rights for women.
Okay.
Under John Locke's natural rights philosophy, it was never specified only men get the right to life, liberty, and property. It was described as men, women, and all human beings.
Okay.
You also mentioned the case of DeJong. In that case, the Supreme Court held that freedom of assembly was as important as freedom of speech. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
I feel as if I do agree, because freedom of speech and freedom of assembly both tie into Locke's natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And another reason why I agree is because freedom of assembly was actually considered to be the right to assemble was the right to petition the government, and petition act is also kind of a way of freedom of speech that the people are able to talk to the government. Where I found that people thought that the right to assemble was also the right to petition was that through the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was a petition to the government that outlined the rights to freedom of assembly.
The Supreme Court actually viewed the First Amendment as the matrix for all other forms of freedoms, and it was actually thought by Thomas Jefferson that all forms of expression were necessary for citizens to partake in government.
But why do we need to assemble? Can't we just tell the government what we want by written petitions or phone calls or?
Well, the right. I think that. The reason why we need to assemble is because it kind of keeps the government in check by kind of almost like scaring them by, if we show up in a huge assembly, then that will probably mean something more to the government than if we just like write them a letter or whatever. And as you said, can't we just tell them through petitions? Like I said earlier, petitions were considered to be, or the right to assembly was considered to be the right to petition the government.
And assembly throughout the years has often led to changes in laws. There aren't specific cases or assemblies, but throughout time, many assemblies have led to the Equality Act. In Biden's speech, he mentioned that. I think many LGBTQ movements had led to that happening.
It was also mentioned in Biden's speech that the autocrats believe that democracy was currently setting in here in America due to current acts of protest that was viewed as an insurrection here in America, such as January 6th.
And specific movements include the civil rights movement.
So one of the things that always jumps out at me is that in our country back in right after World War I, when there were a lot of Americans who were just concerned with the number of Central Europeans and Eastern Europeans who had come into this country, and they really thought we were losing their America, thousands of members of the Ku Klux Klan marched on Washington in back-to-back years. Isn't that the same kind of effort to influence the way the country runs? And what's the difference in their marches and the marches of the women or the civil rights marches in the 60s? What's the difference?
I do not believe that there is a legal difference if I'm viewing this just from a legal, unbiased point of view. But if I view it from a more humane point of view, then I think that most people would think the difference is that the majority of people, at least today, agree with the women's rights movements, but the minority of the people agree with the Ku Klux Klan's movements.
The difference is violence. With the Capitol riots and the BLM, there was lots of violence, and we saw this on social media. And with like assemblies around the world, we weren't seeing on social media how much violence was actually going on.
I think what my partner is trying to say is since one of the differences between these two things is that the Ku Klux Klan, unlike women's suffrage movements and whatnot, uses violence to get across their points, while these other movements are not generally thought to have used violence. While there might have been some violence, the Ku Klux Klan is generally thought of as a violent movement, while these other movements are not. And
okay. Thank you. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would actually have to disagree with my partner. I do not believe that assemblies such as the women's rights movements really and the BLM movements really incite violence. I feel that there are many forms that just did not get as much recognition that were actually a very peaceful way of assembly. And I just feel that certain assemblies really helped protect the rights of other minorities and gives them a bigger voice within government.
I think what really starts the violence in assemblies is hate speech. I think that's like, I think that's where it all starts. And solutions we can take to fight this is through speaking up about diversity and equality. We can, the more we undermine hate speech with loving words, logical arguments, and truth telling, the more that we can prevent this all in the future.
Well,
okay, thank you. You've answered me. Thank you.
And so my question just went right out of my head. So you seem to think that one of the purposes of assembly is intimidation of the government. Is that what you think?
Well, under Socrates' belief in the Socratic method, he wanted us to be able to question government. And I feel that goes hand in hand with our rights to speech, where we are able to speak out and question our government.
Okay, but how about, Sammy, I think you're the one who said that you thought that there was intimidation involved.
Well, I may have used kind of slightly the wrong words there. I was just trying to get across my point, but I do feel like assembly, the government is going to see a large assembly of people all protesting for something as a lot more powerful than seeing just a paper with a bunch of signatures on it, like a petition.
Okay.
The courts have placed limits on freedom of assembly, right?
Yes, under Hague v. Congress of Industrial Organizations, it was concluded that while people have the right to assemble, the government is responsible for ensuring that these demonstrations remain peaceful.
You're done.
Done. I wasn't done.
Well, I thought that was a great job. Thank you. That was really fun. You certainly are engaged and interested, and you don't look like you're bored a bit. I hope you've had fun doing this. We certainly have. You touched all kinds of things there that was really, starting with the Shays Rebellion was a really nice start. and talking about U.S. versus Cruikshank and the Haymarket riot was interesting. Calling with the women's movement, the Anthony Amendment was very nice. In 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education was helpful, and I think you did a wonderful job. I'm not, I would have loved to have talked to you more. One of the reasons we would have been happy to have more time is to talk to you more about the January 6th insurrection. And you said when there's violence, we should stop immediately. Well, how? Is probably what a lot of people were wondering at the time. And that would have been a really nice conversation to continue. Thank you. I think you did a great job. I hope you had really a good time doing this. You all are obviously very enthusiastic, and I hope that will stay with you, because we need you to be as engaged and interested in being a good citizen as you can. So thank you. It was a lovely job.
I certainly agree. Thank you all, and to your teacher as well. Great job. I appreciated your Thomas Jefferson quote at the beginning of your prepared remarks. I liked that you cited De Jong, because that was my prepared question. I had already planned to ask you about that. So I appreciate that. I'm not sure we've heard Brown versus Board of Education in this context. I thought that was an interesting case to throw in your beginning remarks. When you referenced RGB, and apparently couldn't recall that RGB was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, so we had a little bit of trouble making that connection when we did the follow-up. So we need to make sure we're familiar with everything we put in our prepared remarks. I liked also that you were applying information you've learned in reference to other states at the end. You mentioned 2 states that had provided broader rights. And I think that's an interesting concept to look around to see what everyone else is doing. Not everybody does things the same. And I think that was important. In the follow-up, I appreciated that you pulled in some cases when you were discussing the Morris case, and actually some speeches that you apparently have either watched or rewatched. And I thought that was important. And you went all the way back to Socrates to answer our questions. And that's phenomenal. I really appreciated our conversation.
So I enjoyed it as well. I want to ask you to do me a couple of favors. I want you to take the time, and I know you're eager to talk, but I want you to take the time to listen to each other, because sometimes in the desire to get a point out or to get something done, sometimes you step on an idea. And I really do kind of need to go back to something. And that was, Sammy, I really appreciated the fact that you tried to make a distinction between a Klan, which may have been peaceful, but its purpose was intimidation. I caught that was what you were trying to say. And that didn't necessarily require disagreement, that your point was well made. And I just want you all to be careful on that one, because anyway, let me move on. The points that you covered, you did a good job. I thought you talked about, as my colleagues have said, a number of important cases. You're really very talented and very deserving team. Thank you and good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, team. And thank you, Mr. DeCerbo, for all of your hard work and your support for your students as you've been moving through. Students, good luck as you progress in your academics, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.